The Keeper. This is a true story. I am not telling you this for entertainment. I am not telling you this because I want attention or sympathy or because I need someone to believe me. I am telling you this because I need someone to know before it is too late. My boss paid me to poison other people's cattle. I did it in the darkness in the hills where no one could see, where the only witnesses were the stars and the things that live in shadows. I told myself it was for my family. I told myself no one would get hurt. I told myself that what happens to animals does not matter as much as what happens to people. I was wrong about all of it. Something saw me out there in those hills, something that had been watching those lands long before my grandfather's grandfather drew his first breath. Something old, something patient, something that does not forgive and does not forget. And it followed me home. 20 years have passed since those nights. My hair has turned gray. My son has grown and married and given me grandchildren. I have tried to live a normal life, tried to convince myself that what happened was just a nightmare, just the imagination of a young man scared of the dark. But every night before I sleep, I check the small brass bell that sits in the drawer of my nightstand. The bell I found outside my window all those years ago. The bell I have never been able to throw away, no matter how many times I've tried. It is cold to the touch, always cold, even in summer. And sometimes when the house is quiet and the moon is dark, I hear it ring by itself. That is when I know he is watching. My name is Marcos Delgado, and this is the story of how I met the thing they call El Guardián, the Keeper, the one who balances the scales. I was 24 years old when it all began. Young, strong, desperate in ways that only poverty can make a man desperate. My wife, Elena, had given birth to our first child 3 months earlier, a boy with her dark eyes and my stubborn chin. We lived in a small house on the outskirts of a village in Jalisco, Mexico, the kind of place where the roads turn to dirt once you leave the main street, and the nearest doctor is 2 hours away by bus. We had nothing. No land, no livestock, no trade that could guarantee steady money. I took whatever work I could find. Some days I hauled bricks at construction sites. Other days I chopped wood for the old women who could no longer swing an axe. Most days I stood in the plaza waiting for someone to offer me a few pesos for a few hours of my sweat. The money came and went, mostly went. Elena tried not to complain, but I could see the worry in her eyes every time she counted the coins in the jar. Every time she calculated whether we could afford milk or medicine or both, but never quite enough of either. I remember lying awake at night listening to my son breathe in his crib beside our bed, feeling a weight on my chest heavier than any load I had ever carried. The weight of a man who cannot provide for his own blood. Elena would reach for me in the darkness, her hand finding mine, squeezing gently. She never said anything. She did not need to. That touch said everything. I am here. We will survive. But please find a way. I would have done anything to lift that weight, anything at all. That is the thing about desperation. It does not make you evil. It makes you blind, blind to consequences, blind to warnings, blind to the doors you are opening and what waits on the other side. I met Esteban Morales at the Saturday market on a morning when the sun was already brutal by 8 o'clock. He was standing behind an old pickup truck selling milk and cheese and sour cream to a line of customers that stretched past 3 other vendors. His products were famous in the region, fresh, rich. The kind of quality that came from healthy cattle and clean pastures and years of knowing exactly what you were doing. He was a big man, Esteban. 35 years old, skin darkened by decades of mountain sun, hands rough as tree bark. When he smiled, which was often in those early days, his whole face transformed into something warm and trustworthy. The kind of man you wanted to shake hands with, the kind of man you wanted to call friend. I approached him because I saw him struggling to lift a crate of cheese wheels into the truck bed. I offered to help. He looked me up and down, assessing me the way you assess a horse you might buy, and then he nodded. We worked together for 3 hours that morning. By the time the market closed, my shirt was soaked through and my arms ached in that good way that means honest labor. Esteban handed me a fold of bills more than I expected and a wedge of cheese wrapped in cloth. "Take this to your wife," he said. "Good for women who just had babies." I thanked him more times than dignity should allow. He just laughed and clapped me on the shoulder hard enough to make me stumble. Over the following weeks, I returned to help him every market day. We talked while we worked. He told me about his ranch in the hills, about his wife Rosario and their 4 children, about the generations of his family who had worked that land before him. I told him about Elena and the baby and the fear that kept me awake at night. One evening, as we sat on the tailgate of his truck sharing a bottle of mezcal he had brought from home, he made me an offer. "Come work for me," he said. "Full time. 5 days at the ranch, 2 days home with your family. I will pay you monthly feed, you give you a room. It is hard work, but you are not afraid of hard work." I thought about Elena alone with the baby for 5 days at a time. I thought about the empty jar on our shelf. I thought about the look in her eyes when she did not have enough coins to count. I said yes. The ranch was 2 hours from the village by truck, and the last hour was on dirt roads that wound through hills covered in oak trees and wild grass. The higher we climbed, the more the world below disappeared. By the time we reached the property, there was no sign of civilization in any direction, just land and sky and silence. No telephone signal, Esteban told me as we pulled up to the main house. No electricity except what the generator gives us. "If you need to call your wife, you have to drive down to the valley." He said it casually, like it was a minor inconvenience. He did not mention that the generator often failed. He did not mention that the drive to the valley took over an hour. He did not mention that once you were here, you were alone, in ways that city people cannot understand. The ranch itself was impressive. A large wooden house that his grandfather had built, surrounded by corrals and barns and pastures that stretched farther than I could see. There were over 50 head of cattle, a dozen horses, chickens, goats, pigs. It was a working operation, the kind that required constant attention and multiple hands. But I was the only worker who stayed overnight. The others, 3 men from a nearby village, came in the morning and left before dark. They had families. They had other obligations. They did not need the money badly enough to sleep in these hills. I did. The first night I lay on a thin mattress in a small room at the corner of the house. The window looked out onto the pasture where the cattle slept, their shapes barely visible in the starlight. The silence was enormous. Not the silence of a quiet room, but the silence of a place where sound itself seemed swallowed by distance. I closed my eyes and thought of Elena, of the way she smelled like soap and wood smoke, of the way her hair fell across the pillow when she slept, of the way my son's tiny fingers wrapped around my thumb. "I will do this for you," I whispered into the darkness. "I will make this work." I had almost fallen asleep when I felt it, a coldness at the back of my neck. Not a draft, not the mountain air, something else. The specific crawling sensation of being watched. I opened my eyes and looked at the window. Nothing, just darkness and the distant shapes of cattle. I sat up. My heart was beating faster than it should have been. I scanned the room, the corners, the door. Everything was still. Everything was exactly as it should be. Probably just the wind, I told myself. Old house, lots of drafts. I lay back down. I pulled the blanket up to my chin like a child afraid of monsters. I stared at the ceiling and waited for the feeling to pass. It did not pass. Not entirely. Something in that room felt different from the air outside. Heavier, watching, patient. I must have fallen asleep eventually because I remember dreaming of bells ringing somewhere far away, and when I woke to the rooster's crow at 4 in the morning, the feeling was gone. I did not think about it again. There was too much work to do, too many animals to feed, and fences to mend and stalls to clean. The days blurred together in a rhythm of sweat and exhaustion and the simple satisfaction of labor. By the time I fell into bed each night, I was too tired to feel anything except the ache in my muscles. The Morales family welcomed me in ways I had not expected. Rosario Esteban's wife was a small woman with a quick smile and a talent for cooking that made every meal feel like a celebration. She treated me like a younger brother, scolding me when I skipped breakfast, packing extra tortillas in my lunch. The children were shy at first, but warmed to me quickly. Santiago was the oldest. 12 years old, tall for his age, with his father's dark eyes and his mother's gentle nature. He attached himself to me almost immediately, following me to the pastures, asking endless questions about the city and the ocean and all the things he had only read about in books. He was smart, curious kind, the sort of child who made you believe the world might turn out all right after all. He loved ghost stories. Every evening as the sun sank behind the hills and the shadows stretched long across the ground, he would find me on the porch and beg me to tell him something scary. I made up tales about haunted houses and vengeful spirits and cursed treasures, the kind of nonsense that children love and forget by morning. One night, about 2 weeks after I arrived, Santiago did not ask for a story. Instead, he sat beside me on the porch steps and looked out at the darkening hills with an expression that seemed too old for his face. "Have you ever heard of El Guardián?" he asked. I shook my head. "The keeper," he said. "People say there is something living in the mountains above us, something old. It protects the cattle of people who know how to honor it. But if someone does something bad, something to hurt the animals or the land, it comes for them. It takes what they love most." I smiled and ruffled his hair. "Just stories," I told him. "Old women tales to scare children into behaving." He did not smile back. "My grandmother saw it once, before she died. She said it was tall, taller than any man. It wore a black hat and black clothes, and it smiled all the time, even when it was angry, even when it was about to take something from you. She said the smile was the worst part, because it never changed, no matter what it was doing." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. I told myself it was just the atmosphere, just the power of a child's imagination. It was not. 6 months passed. I fell into the rhythm of ranch life. I learned which cows were temperamental and which horses could be trusted. I learned to read the weather by the way the birds flew and to predict rain by the ache in my knees. I sent money home to Elena every week and visited her and the baby on my days off, holding them both as if I might never let go. Each time I returned to the ranch, the separation grew harder. My son was changing so fast, learning to sit up, learning to laugh, learning to recognize faces. I was missing it, missing all of it, and the guilt gnawed at me even as I told myself it was necessary. Esteban and I grew close. We worked side by side. We shared meals. We drank together on Saturday nights when the work was done and the stars were thick above us. He told me about his fears and his hopes and the pressure of being the third generation to run this land. I told him about mine. One evening I gathered my courage and asked him something I had been thinking about for weeks. "I want you to be my son's godfather," I said. "I know it is a big thing to ask, but there is no one else I trust more." Esteban was quiet for a long moment. When he looked at me, his eyes were wet. "It would be my honor," he said. The baptism was held in the small church in my village, with both families crowded into pews that smelled of old wood and candle wax. The priest spoke the ancient words. Water touched my son's forehead, and Esteban Morales became my compadre, my co-father bound to my family by a tie that in our culture is sacred as blood. Afterward there was a party at our house. Food and music and laughter. Elena danced with Rosario while I held my son and watched, feeling for the first time in years that maybe everything would be all right. That maybe the darkness I had sensed in those hills was just my imagination. That maybe a man could work hard and love his family and build something good without paying a price he could not afford. I was wrong. I did not know that I had already started walking toward my own destruction. That the door I would soon open could never be closed again, that by the time I understood what I had agreed to, it would be far too late. Because the thing about signing your own death warrant is that nobody shows you the paper. Nobody points to the line where your name goes. You just wake up one day and realize that the ink is already dry, that the seal is already pressed, that the sentence has already been pronounced by something older and darker than any court built by human hands. I signed mine the night I took that first bag of poisoned grain and walked into the darkness. But before that night, before everything changed, there was a moment. A single moment when I could have turned back. When the universe gave me one last warning. It happened on an evening about 8 months after I started working at the ranch. Esteban had been different lately. Quieter, angrier. The lines on his face had deepened. He spent long hours in his office staring at ledgers and muttering about competitors and falling prices. The warmth I had known in him was cooling, replaced by something brittle and desperate. I found him one night standing at his bedroom window at 3 a.m. I had woken to use the outhouse and seen the light under his door. "Compadre," I said, "you should sleep." He did not turn around. He just kept staring out into the darkness, his breath fogging the glass. "There is someone out there," he said. His voice was strange, flat, empty, watching us. I can feel it every night now, standing at the edge of the property, waiting. I looked past him through the window. I saw nothing but shadows and the distant shapes of sleeping cattle. "There is no one," I said. "Just the night playing tricks." "No." He shook his head slowly, and I saw his hands trembling where they gripped the windowsill. "No. Something is out there. Something has been out there for weeks, and it is getting closer." I told myself he was just stressed, just tired, just a man under too much pressure seeing threats where there were none. But as I walked back to my room, I felt it again. That coldness at my neck, that weight of invisible eyes. I thought about Elena alone in our bed 2 hours away. I thought about my son sleeping in his crib, vulnerable and innocent. And I prayed for the first time in years that whatever was watching from the darkness would stay there. It did not stay. It never does. The decline came slowly at first, then all at once. Other ranches in the region began selling their milk and cheese at lower prices. Newcomers with bigger operations and cheaper labor. Middlemen who cared nothing for quality and everything for profit. Week by week, Esteban watched his customers drift away. The lines at the market grew shorter. The cash box grew lighter. The worry lines on his face carved themselves deeper into flesh that seemed to age years in a matter of months. I noticed the change in him before anyone else, the way his laughter disappeared entirely, the way his shoulders curved inward as if bracing against a blow that never stopped coming, the way he would stand at the window late at night staring out at nothing, his reflection in the glass looking like a ghost of the man I had first met. He stopped sleeping. I would hear him pacing the hallways at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, his footsteps heavy and arrhythmic, pausing sometimes outside my door for long minutes before moving on. Sometimes I heard him talking, his voice low and urgent, but when I pressed my ear to the wall, I could not make out the words. It sounded like pleading. It sounded like bargaining. But there was never another voice answering back. Rosario tried to comfort him. She made his favorite meals. She rubbed his shoulders when he sat hunched over his ledgers. She whispered reassurances that everything would be all right, that they had survived hard times before, that God would provide. He pushed her away. Gently at first, then not so gently. The children learned to avoid him. Even Santiago, who had always been his father's shadow, began finding excuses to be elsewhere when Esteban was in the room. The warmth that had filled that house when I first arrived was draining away like water from a cracked vessel, replaced by something cold and tense and waiting. I should have seen it for what it was. I should have recognized the signs of a man being hollowed out by something darker than financial worry. But I was thinking about Elena, about my son growing up without enough food on the table, about the money I was sending home and how much more I could send if Esteban paid me what he had been promising. The morning we found the sick cattle, something in Esteban finally broke. There were two of them lying in the corner of the barn where they had collapsed during the night. Their eyes had gone milky white like glass covered in frost. Their breathing was shallow and labored. When I touched one of them, its hide was burning with fever, but it did not react to my hand. It just lay there staring at nothing, waiting to die. Esteban stood over them for a long time without speaking. His hands were clenched at his sides. His jaw was tight enough to crack teeth. "Someone did this," he finally said. His voice was quiet, too quiet. "Someone poisoned them." I tried to reason with him. "Maybe it is just sickness," I said. "Maybe they ate something bad in the pasture. These things happen." He turned to look at me, and the expression on his face made me take a step backward. His eyes were red-rimmed and wild. His lips were pulled back from his teeth in something that was not quite a smile. "Do not be naive, Marcos. This is not sickness. This is sabotage. Someone is trying to destroy everything my family has built." He was certain it was Bernardo, a rancher from the valley below, who had been expanding his operation, buying up land, undercutting prices. They had argued at the market a few weeks earlier, a heated exchange about territory and customers that had nearly come to blows. "That snake," Esteban muttered as we buried the dead cattle 3 days later. "That jealous, crawling snake. He thinks he can take what belongs to me. He thinks he can poison my cattle, and I will just accept it like a coward." I did not believe Bernardo had done anything. I had met the man once or twice. He seemed ordinary, competitive, yes, but not criminal, not the type to sneak onto another man's land in the middle of the night. But Esteban was beyond reason. The 2 dead cattle became proof of a conspiracy that existed only in his mind. Or maybe something else was feeding his paranoia. Maybe the thing that watched from the shadows had already begun to whisper in his ear, nurturing his rage, preparing him for what came next. He called me to the storage barn that evening. The sun had already set, and the only light came from a kerosene lamp that cast dancing shadows on the walls. The air smelled of grain and dust and something else, something faintly chemical that made my nose burn. He was sitting on a wooden crate when I entered. In his hands was a burlap sack smaller than the ones we used for feed, tied closed with rough twine. "Close the door," he said. I closed it. The shadows pressed closer. "Sit down, Marcos. We need to talk." I sat on a crate across from him. The lamp flame flickered between us, making his face shift and change. One moment he looked like the man I knew, the man who had become my compadre, my brother in all but blood. The next moment he looked like someone else entirely. Someone hungry, someone desperate, someone I did not want to know. He told me what he wanted. His voice was calm, almost casual, as if he were discussing the weather or the price of feed. He wanted me to go to Bernardo's ranch that night. He wanted me to take the sack which contained corn, mixed with poison, and scatter it where the cattle would find it. He wanted me to do to Bernardo what Bernardo had supposedly done to him. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Compadre," I said, "I cannot do this." He looked at me with eyes that had gone flat and cold. "You owe me, Marcos. Everything you have is because of me, your job, your money, your family's survival. Without me, you are nothing." He leaned forward, and the lamplight caught something in his expression that made my stomach clench. "I know about your situation. I know Elena is pregnant again. I know you cannot afford another child on what you were making before. Do you want to go back to standing in the plaza begging for scraps? Do you want your children to grow up hungry? I had not told anyone about Elena's pregnancy. We had only found out last week. The fact that he knew that he had been watching my life, that closely sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the night air. "Nobody will know," he continued. "It is dark. The ranch is far away. You go, you scatter the grain, you come back. Simple, clean. And afterward things will be better for all of us." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a fold of bills. More money than I made in 3 weeks. He set it on the crate between us. "This is for tonight. There will be more when it is done." I looked at the money. I thought about Elena, her hand on her belly, that secret smile she wore when she thought I was not looking. I thought about my son learning to walk now, taking his first steps toward a future I could not guarantee. The lamp flickered. The shadows jumped. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something move in the corner of the barn, something tall and dark that should not have been there. I blinked, and there was nothing. Probably just the wind, I told myself. Just my imagination. I reached for the sack. The road to Bernardo's ranch wound through hills that seemed darker than any hills I had ever seen. The headlights of Esteban's truck carved a narrow tunnel through the blackness, and beyond that tunnel there was nothing. No stars, no moon, just an absence of light so complete it felt physical, pressing against the windows like something trying to get in. I drove slowly, my hands tight on the wheel, my heart beating a rhythm that felt wrong in my chest. The sack sat on the passenger seat beside me, and even through the burlap I could smell that faint chemical odor, that wrongness that clung to what was inside. The clock on the dashboard read 2:13 in the morning. I thought about Elena asleep in our bed, one hand resting on her belly where our second child was growing. I thought about my son dreaming whatever dreams babies dream. I thought about the look on my wife's face if she ever found out what I was about to do. She would leave me. I knew that with absolute certainty. Elena was a good woman, a moral woman, and she would not stay with a man who poisoned innocent animals for money. She would take the children and go back to her mother's house, and I would never see them again. But she would never find out. No one would ever find out. That was what I told myself as I turned onto the dirt road that led to Bernardo's property. That was the lie that made it possible to keep driving instead of turning around. The ranch appeared in the headlights like a ghost emerging from fog. Dark buildings, silent pastures, cattle sleeping in clusters, their shapes barely visible against the ground. I pulled off the road and parked behind a thick stand of oak trees, killing the engine and the lights. The silence that followed was immense. Not the peaceful silence of a sleeping world, but something heavier. Something that felt like held breath. Like something waiting to see what I would do next. I grabbed the sack and climbed out of the truck. The air was cold and wet with dew, and when I breathed I could see the faint cloud of my own exhalation. The grass squelched under my boots as I made my way toward the fence. The cattle did not stir as I climbed over. They lay scattered across the field, dark mounds against darker ground. I moved among them like a shadow reaching into the sack, scattering handfuls of poisoned grain. Some of them lifted their heads. I heard them sniffing the air, heard the soft sounds of mouths finding food. Each sound was a nail in something I did not want to name. I was almost finished when I felt it, a coldness at the back of my neck. That same sensation I had felt on my first night at Esteban's ranch, but stronger now, closer, more deliberate. I spun around, my heart slamming against my ribs. Nothing. Just darkness and cattle and the distant shapes of trees. Probably just the wind, I whispered, just the mountain air. But there was no wind. The air was perfectly still. I scattered the last of the grain with trembling hands. I climbed back over the fence. I walked to the truck as fast as I could without running. It was only when I started the engine that I realized what was wrong. The insects had stopped, the frogs, the nightbirds, all the small sounds that fill the darkness. Gone, silenced. As if every living thing for miles had simultaneously decided to hold its breath. I drove back to Esteban's ranch with my eyes fixed on the road and my hands refusing to stop shaking. The sound of the engine was too loud in that silence, and every shadow that passed through the headlights made me flinch. The insects only started singing again when I was almost home. They resumed as suddenly as they had stopped, as if the world had been paused and then allowed to continue. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself the night was playing tricks on a guilty conscience. I was wrong. The news came 3 days later. Bernardo's cattle had fallen ill, a mysterious sickness that no one could explain. 5 animals dead, 7 more dying. People talked, rumors spread through the market. Bad luck, some said. contaminated feed, a curse from a jealous neighbor. Esteban heard the news with satisfaction he did not bother to hide. He pressed another fold of bills into my hand and clapped me on the shoulder. "You did well, compadre." I looked at the money. I thought about Elena and the baby growing inside her. I thought about the life I was building brick by bloody brick. I took it. Over the next 3 months I did it 4 more times. 4 different ranches, 4 moonless nights. 4 sacks of poisoned grain scattered in sleeping pastures. Each time was easier than the last. That is how corruption works. The first step is the hardest. After that you are just walking a path your own feet have worn smooth. But the dreams would not let me forget. They started after the second time. I would see cattle, hundreds of them lying dead in fields that stretched to the horizon. Their eyes were open, milky white, staring at a sky with no sun. And standing among them was a shape I could never quite see, tall, dark, wearing something on its head that might have been a hat. I would wake from these dreams soaked in sweat, my heart racing. Elena sleeping peacefully beside me, unaware of the darkness her husband was carrying home. The night Esteban told me about Don Aurelio, I knew something had shifted. We were sitting in his office, surrounded by ledgers and papers, and the stale smell of cigar smoke. A map hung on the wall marked with the locations of every ranch in the region. Most of them had red X marks through them now, the ones we had already hit. But there was one with no mark, a ranch high in the mountains, larger than all the others combined. Don Aurelio Esteban set his finger tracing the road that led up into the peaks. He is the real enemy, the one we need to destroy. I had heard stories about Don Aurelio. Everyone had. He was old, they said. His ranch had been in his family for generations beyond counting, and in all that time not a single animal had ever fallen sick. His cattle were the healthiest in the region. His land was the most fertile. His luck was the kind that made other men believe in things they could not see. There were other stories, too. Whispers about deals made at crossroads, about offerings left in the hills, about something that walked his lands at night, tall and silent, protecting what was his. I told Esteban what I had heard. I expected him to laugh. He did not laugh. I know what they say. And I do not care. Guardian or no guardian, that man has taken enough. You go tonight. I wanted to refuse. Everything in me was screaming to refuse. But he was already pushing money across the desk, more than I had ever seen. And I was thinking about Elena and our son and the baby coming and all the things that money could buy. The road to Don Aurelio's ranch climbed higher than any road I had traveled before. The air grew thin, the temperature dropped. The trees changed from oaks to pines and then to twisted, wind-bent things that looked more like claws than plants. The smell started about halfway up, faint at first, but it grew stronger as I climbed. Burning meat, hot metal, something that should not exist, mixing with the normal sense of a mountain night. Don Aurelio's ranch appeared without warning, vast, silent, sprawling across a plateau that seemed carved from the mountain itself. The cattle were awake. All of them. I stopped the truck and stared. Hundreds of animals standing in perfect stillness, every single one facing the same direction, looking toward the mountain peak, looking at something I could not see. I should have left. Every part of me knew I should leave. But I grabbed the sack and stepped out of the truck. The silence hit me like a physical force. No insects, no wind, not even the sound of my own breathing seemed to penetrate that wall of quiet. I climbed the fence. I moved toward the cattle. None of them ate the grain I scattered. They just stood there watching me with eyes that reflected too much light. The bell rang behind me, a single clear tone. I turned around slowly. Nothing. I took a breath. I told myself I had imagined it. The bell rang again, closer. And then came the laughter. Low at first, a rumble at the edge of hearing. But it built, rose, became something unmistakably a voice, though no voice had ever sounded like that. Deep and hollow and wrong. It was laughing at me. I ran. I dropped the sack and I ran toward the fence, toward the truck, toward anything that was not this place. My flashlight died. The darkness swallowed me. I kept running. Something moved ahead of me. The bull was massive, larger than any animal I had ever seen. Its body was black, not the black of fur, but a deeper black, the black of a hole in the world. And its eyes, God help me, its eyes, they glowed, a dull red like coals buried in ash. The bull stood in my path. It did not move. It did not breathe. It just watched me with those impossible eyes. I tried to go around it. It shifted, blocking me. I tried again. It blocked me again. Then it opened its mouth and laughed. That deep, hollow, impossible laughter poured out of its throat. The lips peeled back from teeth that were too white, too sharp. And still the laughter came. I do not remember deciding to run. I only remember crashing through darkness branches, whipping my face, my knees screaming where I struck something hard. Blood ran warm down my leg. The fence appeared. I hit it at full speed, flipping over, landing hard on the other side. Behind me, hoofbeats, slow, deliberate. I scrambled to the truck, threw myself inside, turned the key. Nothing. I turned it again. The hoofbeats stopped. The bull was standing at the edge of the road, close enough to see those red eyes glowing, close enough to see the way its head tilted, curious and amused. It smiled. Not a bovine expression. A smile, wide and wrong and full of teeth. I turned the key one more time. The engine roared to life. I drove away without looking back. But in the mirror, those eyes followed me until I rounded the curve and they finally disappeared. When I reached Esteban's ranch, I did not go to him. I went straight to my room and collapsed on my bed, my whole body shaking, my mind trying to process what I had seen. I lay there until dawn, unable to sleep, unable to think about anything except those red eyes and that impossible smile. When the sun finally rose, I went outside to clear my head. That was when I found it. There were footprints beneath my window. Deep impressions in the soft earth, too large to be human, too heavy to have been made by anything normal. And beside the footprints, lying on the ground like an offering or a warning, was a small brass bell. I picked it up with trembling hands. It was cold, colder than the morning air, colder than anything had a right to be. I should have thrown it away. I should have hurled it into the trees and never looked back. Instead, I put it in my pocket. I do not know why. Maybe because throwing it away felt like admitting something I was not ready to admit. Maybe because some part of me knew this was evidence. Proof that I had not imagined what I had seen. Or maybe because the thing that left it wanted me to keep it. 3 days later, 6 of Esteban's cattle fell sick. The exact number I had tried to poison at Don Aurelio's ranch. The bell in my pocket seemed to grow colder every time I touched it. The rot spread faster after that night. Not just through the cattle, but through everything. Through the land, through the house, through the people who lived there. It was as if something had been uncorked, some poison released into the air that seeped into every crack and corner and could not be washed away. The milk turned first. By noon each day it had begun to change, a grayish tint creeping in from the edges. By evening it was the color of dirty dishwater, thick and clotted, smelling like decay mixed with something metallic. We poured out gallons every day. The cattle grew listless. They stood in the pastures with their heads hanging, refusing to graze. When I walked among them, they did not react. They just stood there staring at nothing, or perhaps at something I could not see. 6 of them had died by the end of the first week. Always 6. The number seemed to mock me every time I counted. The horses stopped eating. The chickens stopped laying. Even the dogs began to avoid me, slinking away when I approached, whimpering at something in the air that I could not smell, but they clearly could. The well water turned bitter. The garden withered despite daily watering, and at night the sounds changed. The familiar chorus of insects and frogs grew sparse, then sporadic, then silent. In their place came other sounds, whispers that seemed to come from the walls, footsteps on the roof when no one was there, and always, always the distant ringing of a bell. I kept the brass bell in my pocket at all times now. Sometimes when everything else was quiet, it would ring softly by itself. A single clear tone that seemed to come from inside my chest, rather than from the metal in my pocket. When that happened, I knew he was watching. The thing from the mountain. The keeper of the scales. Rosario felt it too. I saw her standing in the kitchen one morning, frozen, staring at a corner where the shadows seemed deeper than they should be. "There is something in this house," she said, "something that was not here before." She started talking to herself. Real conversations with empty air. I heard her in the hallway one night saying please over and over to someone who was not there. The children grew sick, fevers that came and went, coughs that rattled their chests. Santiago was the worst. The boy who had followed me everywhere was fading before my eyes. Dark circles under his eyes, bones showing through skin that had grown pale as paper. I found him at his window one night past midnight, his hand pressed against the glass. "What are you looking at?" I asked. He did not turn around. His voice was barely a whisper. "The tall man. He is out there again. He comes every night now. He stands by the fence and watches our house. And he is always smiling." I moved to the window and looked out. I saw nothing. "There is no one there," I said. "Just your imagination." Santiago turned to look at me. His eyes were hollow, exhausted, far too knowing. He is real, and I think he is waiting for something. I touched the bell in my pocket. It was cold as ice. That night I could not sleep. I lay in bed thinking about Elena, about the baby growing inside her, about what I had brought into this world through my own greed and weakness. I pulled out the bell and held it in my palm, watching it glint in the moonlight. "What do you want?" I whispered to it. "What do you want from me?" It did not answer, but somewhere outside in the darkness beyond the window I heard laughter. Esteban's deterioration was harder to watch because it was more complete. The man I had known was disappearing piece by piece, replaced by something else, something that wore his face but moved wrong, spoke wrong, looked at the world through eyes that had seen too much of something they could not understand. He stopped sleeping entirely. I would hear him pacing at all hours, sometimes talking, sometimes screaming at things that were not there. When I saw him in the mornings, his eyes were red craters, his hands trembling constantly. He grew cruel in ways that shocked me. He snapped at Rosario, he screamed at the workers, he threw things when his temper broke. But it was what he did to Santiago that I cannot forget. The boy had been sick for days, burning with fever. Rosario wanted to take him to the hospital. Esteban refused. "The boy is fine," he said. "He just wants attention." He dragged Santiago out of bed and threw him into the dirt of the yard. "Get up, work. I will not have weakness in my house." He drew back his foot to kick. I stepped between them. "Stop." I said it harder than I had ever spoken to him. "He is sick. Look at him." Something flickered in Esteban's expression. Confusion. Recognition. Then it was gone, replaced by that cold blankness. He turned and walked away without a word. I carried Santiago inside and sat with him until his fever broke near dawn. The bell in my pocket rang softly the whole time, as if counting down to something I could not see. 1 week later, Esteban called me to his office. "You have to go back," he said, "to Don Aurelio's ranch tonight." I stared at him. "No, I cannot. You will." His voice was flat dead. "You will go and you will finish what you started. You will poison every animal on that ranch." I told him about the bull, about the laughter, about the bell that appeared beneath my window, about the thing that Santiago saw every night. He listened without expression. "I do not care," he said when I finished. "Go or do not come back." I thought about refusing. I thought about walking out and never returning. But I thought about Elena, about my son, about the baby coming, about the money I needed and the life I was trying to build. I went. The drive up the mountain was worse than before. The smell started earlier, stronger, burning meat and hot metal and something sweet beneath it, the sweetness of decay. Don Aurelio's ranch appeared in the headlights, silent as a graveyard. The cattle were arranged in a circle this time, hundreds of them lying on the ground in a perfect ring, their bodies pointing inward toward a central point. I stopped the truck. I should have left. I got out. The center of the circle was empty. just a patch of bare earth scorched black where nothing grew. And carved into that earth was a symbol I did not recognize but understood instinctively, a boundary, a mark of ownership. My flashlight flickered and died. The darkness that fell was not ordinary darkness. It had weight, presence, intention. I fumbled for the flashlight, shook it, slapped it against my palm. Nothing. Then I heard the footsteps, behind me, heavy, deliberate, coming closer. I turned around slowly. He was standing 10 feet away, the thing they called El Guardián. He was tall, 7 feet at least. His body was wrapped in black clothes that seemed to absorb light, that made him look less like a person, and more like a hole cut in the fabric of the world. On his head was a hat, wide-brimmed black as the rest of him, casting a shadow that hid most of his face. But not the mouth. His face was wrong. The skin was textured like bark pulled tight over bones that were too sharp, too angular. There were hollows where cheeks should be, and those hollows seemed to go on forever. And the mouth, the smile, fixed in a permanent grin that stretched from ear to ear, revealing teeth that were too numerous, too sharp, too yellow. The smile did not change. It could not change. It was carved there, burned there, part of him. The smell that rose from him was the smell I had been breathing all night, but concentrated to the point of agony, burning meat, hot metal, the sweetness of rot. He spoke. His voice was not a voice. It was a vibration, a pressure, a sound that bypassed my ears and planted itself directly in my brain. I have been waiting for you, Marcos Delgado. I tried to run. My legs would not move. I tried to scream. My voice would not come. You came to my land. You brought poison. You thought you could hurt what belongs to me. His head tilted to one side. I know what you are. I know what you have done. I know every animal that has died because of you and the man who sends you. He took a step forward. The ground beneath his foot hissed. You are not evil. I can see that. You are weak, desperate. A tool in the hand of a man who has no understanding of what he has awakened, but tools must still answer for what they do. Every action creates a debt. Every death demands a balance. He was close enough now that I could see the way his shadow fell in the wrong direction, the way his eyes, buried deep in those impossible sockets, glowed with faint red light. I will offer you something I have not offered in a very long time. A choice. His hand rose, not a hand. Something that looked like a hand the way a scarecrow looks like a man. Leave this place. Leave the man who sent you. Never return to these mountains. Never speak of what you have seen. Do these things and I will let you go. Your debt will be reduced, not erased. Nothing is ever erased, but reduced enough that you may live your life in peace. The rest will fall on the one who deserves it. The hand hung in the air. But if you stay, if you continue to serve him, if you come back even once more, the smile seemed to widen, though it did not move. Then your debt will be your own to pay, in full, and I always collect in full. My legs unlocked. I stumbled backward. One more thing. The voice followed me. You carry something of mine, a bell. Keep it. It will remind you of what you owe. And if you ever forget, if you ever cross the line again, it will call me, and I will come. I ran. I do not remember reaching the truck. I only remember driving faster than I had ever driven down that mountain with tears streaming down my face. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing at the edge of the property, watching me go, still smiling. And beside him, its eyes glowing red, stood the black bull. I made it back to Esteban's ranch as the sun was rising. I did not speak to anyone. I went to my room and collapsed and lay there shaking until I heard Esteban's footsteps outside my door. He burst in without knocking. You failed again. Don Aurelio's cattle are fine. I sat up slowly. Something had changed in me. I did not fail, I said. I was given a choice, and I chose. I told him everything. The circle of cattle, the burned earth. El Guardián, the words that had been spoken, the choice I had been offered. When I finished, Esteban was silent. Then he laughed, broken and bitter. You expect me to believe some demon gave you permission to abandon me? Believe what you want? I stood and began gathering my things. I am leaving. Today. I am going back to my family. His hand shot out and grabbed my arm. You cannot leave. You owe me everything. No, I pulled free. Everything I have is because I was willing to sell my soul, and I am done. His face twisted through several expressions: anger, fear, hatred. If you leave, do not ever come back. You are dead to me. I looked at him, at the man who had been my compadre. I barely recognized him. Goodbye, Esteban. Santiago broke away from his mother as I walked to the yard. He threw his arms around me, his thin body shaking. Please do not go. I am scared. Something bad is coming. I knelt down. His eyes were hollow-haunted. I have to go, I told him. But I will come back to visit, I promise. It was a lie. I knew it even as I said it. I hugged him one last time, felt his ribs through his shirt, then I stood and walked away. The bell in my pocket was silent, but I could feel it watching, feel it waiting, feel it counting down to something I could not prevent. 1 month later, I learned that Santiago was dead. A woman at the market told me, just gossip to her. The boy drowned, she said. In the river near his family's ranch, they found him 3 kilometers downstream. No one knows why he went out in the middle of the night. I stood frozen while she talked. The strangest thing, she continued, was what they found in his hand. A little brass bell, the kind they put on cattle, but it did not belong to any animal on the ranch. I felt the bell in my pocket, still there, still cold. There were 2 bells now, one that I carried, one that Santiago had died holding. I thanked the woman and walked away. I found a quiet corner behind the church and I sat in the dirt and I wept. I wept for Santiago, for the boy who loved ghost stories and never got to grow up. I wept for myself, for the choices I had made, for the part I had played, and I wept because I understood now what El Guardián had meant. Your debt will be reduced, not erased. Santiago was not my payment. Santiago was Esteban's payment, the purest soul in that household, the one most loved. But I still carried a debt of my own, reduced, not erased, and the bell in my pocket would make sure I never forgot. The news that followed was fragmentary. Whispers filtered through multiple sources. The Morales family disappeared, all of them. One night they were there, and the next morning they were gone. The workers found the house empty. Dinner still on the table, half-eaten, beds unmade, personal belongings scattered as if the family had simply vanished mid-routine. No signs of struggle, no blood, nothing to suggest violence. Just absence. The only thing out of place was a word written on the living room wall in charcoal. Pagado, paid. No one ever found them. Not the police, not the relatives, not the townspeople who searched for months. Some say they fled, some say they were taken. The ranch was abandoned, no one would buy it. The buildings fell into ruin. Grass grew through floorboards, the roof collapsed. But even now, people say if you drive past at night, you can see lights in windows where no lights should be, shapes moving behind broken glass, and sometimes carried on the wind the sound of laughter. Many months passed before I could speak about what had happened. The words stayed locked inside me, festering like an infected wound. Elena knew something was wrong. She saw me flinch at shadows. She heard me cry out in the night. She felt the coldness of the bell I kept hidden in my drawer, the bell I checked every evening before bed. Finally, I went to see Tio Salvador, my mother's brother, a curandero who dealt with things doctors and priests could not touch. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he burned copal, the sacred resin, and passed branches of rue over my body while chanting in a language older than Spanish. When he finished, he looked at me with eyes that held no judgment. You carry a shadow, he said, not a curse, but a mark. When a person sees El Guardián and lives, they take something of it with them, a piece of its attention, a thread that connects them to what they witnessed. I asked him what El Guardián was. He shook his head. It existed before the Spanish came, before the Aztecs built their temples. It keeps balance, protects those who honor it, punishes those who take without giving. It does not forgive and it does not forget." He leaned forward. "The boy was Esteban's payment. But you still owe. Reduced, as the creature said, but not gone. That bell you carry is your reminder. Your connection. If you live well, if you never cross the line again, the debt may fade with time, but it will never fully disappear. And if you ever forget what you learned, if you ever do something to tip the scales again, the bell will call him, and he will come." He placed his hand on my shoulder. "You were given mercy. Use it wisely." That was 20 years ago. I have tried to live a good life since then. I returned to Elena and my son. I found honest work. I went to church. I said my prayers. I tried to be the kind of man my children could look up to. My son grew up. He married a good woman. They gave me grandchildren. Elena's hair has gone gray like mine, but she is still the woman I married. She knows now most of it. She listened. She held me. She did not judge. I do not go near the mountains anymore. Even now I feel something watching whenever I look at those distant peaks. And every night before I sleep I check the bell in my nightstand drawer. It sits there cold as always, waiting. Sometimes in the deep silence of the night it rings softly by itself. When that happens, I close my eyes and pray. I thought the prayers were working. After 20 years of checking the bell and finding it silent, I thought maybe the debt had faded enough, that El Guardián had finally turned his attention elsewhere. I was wrong. 2 weeks ago my son came to visit. He seemed troubled, distracted. I asked him what was wrong. He hesitated. Then he told me. He had invested in a business, a cattle ranch in the mountains. His partner, a man named Coronado, had been having trouble with competitors, and his partner had suggested a way to solve the problem. I felt the blood drain from my face. What way, I asked. My son would not meet my eyes. He said it was nothing, just business, nothing that would hurt anyone. I grabbed his arm harder than I meant to. What way? He pulled free, startled by my intensity. "It does not matter, Papa." I said no. He left an hour later. I stood at the window and watched his truck disappear down the road, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. That night the bell rang. Not the soft, distant tone I had grown used to over the years. This was loud, clear, insistent. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering. Elena stirred beside me. "What is it, nothing? Go back to sleep." I got up and went to the nightstand, opened the drawer. The bell was vibrating, trembling in place as if something was shaking it from the inside. And then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the ringing. I closed the drawer. I went to the window and looked out at the darkness. Nothing, just shadows and the distant shapes of trees. But I knew I could feel it. Something had changed. 3 nights ago, I woke at 3 in the morning, not from a dream, not from a sound. I simply opened my eyes and knew I was not alone. The room was dark. Elena slept beside me. But there was something else, a smell I had not encountered in 20 years, burning meat, hot metal, the sweetness of decay. I turned my head toward the window. My grandson was standing there. My 5-year-old grandson, who should have been at his parents' house 20 miles away. He was looking out the window, his small hand pressed against the glass. "Abuelo," he said without turning around. "There's a man outside, a very tall man in a black hat. He is smiling at me." My blood turned to ice. I got out of bed slowly. I walked to the window, my legs barely able to carry me. I looked out, and I saw him, El Guardián, standing at the edge of my property, 20 years older in my memory but unchanged in reality. That impossible height, that wide-brimmed hat, that smile that stretched from ear to ear. He was looking directly at my window, directly at me. His head tilted to one side, that curious, amused gesture I remembered so well. Then he raised one hand and pointed. Not at me, at my grandson. I grabbed the boy and pulled him away from the window. I held him against my chest, his small heart beating against mine. When I looked back, El Guardián was gone. But on the ground outside my window, visible in the moonlight, were footprints. Deep impressions leading up to the glass and then away toward the mountains. and beside them, gleaming in the pale light, was a small brass bell. I went outside at dawn. I picked up the bell. It was identical to the one in my drawer. Same size, same weight, same impossible coldness. 2 bells became 3. I know now why he has returned. My son said no to his partner's suggestion, but the scales felt something shift, a possibility, a potential, a door that almost opened. And El Guardián does not deal in almost. He deals in certainty. He came to remind me, to warn me, to show me that the debt I carry can still be called in. That it can extend to my children and my children's children if the balance tips the wrong way. I told my son everything yesterday, every detail I had kept hidden for 20 years. He listened with a face that went pale, then gray, then something beyond color. When I finished, he did not speak for a long time. Then he said, "The ranch deal fell through last week. Coronado found another investor, someone who did not say no. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Tell me you had no part in it. Tell me you did nothing." He met my eyes. I said, "No, Papa. I swear to you." I believe him. I have to believe him. But last night the bell in my drawer rang again, soft, patient, counting. And when I looked out my window, I saw movement in the darkness, a shape at the edge of the property. Tall, still, watching. He is waiting. I do not know for what. Maybe he is waiting to see if my son told the truth, if the choice he made was final. Maybe he is waiting to see if Coronado's new investor will succeed where I failed and whether my family's debt will grow or shrink as a result. Maybe he is waiting for nothing at all. Maybe he simply wants me to remember, to spend my remaining years knowing that the scales are always being weighed, that the balance is always being measured, that the debt I accrued in those dark nights on other men's land will follow me to my grave and perhaps beyond. Or maybe my time has finally come. I'm an old man now. I have lived longer than I deserved. If tonight is the night that the full price comes due, I will not run. I will face what comes and pray that my family is spared the consequences of sins I committed before my son was old enough to walk. But I need someone to know. I need someone to understand. That is why I'm telling you this. Be careful what you do in the darkness. Be careful what debts you accumulate. Be careful whose land you walk on and whose lives you damage in the name of money or desperation or survival, because there are things watching, things that keep count, things that never forgive and never forget. And when they come to collect, there is no negotiation. There is no appeal. There is only the balance. The scales must always balance. I hear the bell now, both of them, the one in my drawer and the one I found 3 days ago, ringing together, harmonizing, and beneath that sound getting closer with every moment footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, patient. He is coming. Not to take me, not tonight. I can feel that somehow. Tonight is not the end. Tonight is another reminder, another warning, another weight added to the scales that have been measuring my life for 20 years. The footsteps have stopped, just outside my window. I will not look. I do not need to. I know what I would see. That smile, that impossible, unchanging smile. I will sit here instead with these bells cold in my palm, and I will wait for dawn. And when the sun rises and he returns to whatever place he goes between visits, I will call my son and tell him to be careful. I will call my grandson's parents and tell them to watch the boy, to never let him near the mountains, to teach him that some doors should never be opened. And I will pray, not for forgiveness. I gave up on that long ago. I will pray for time. Enough time to see my grandchildren grow. Enough time to warn them about the darkness I once walked into so willingly. Enough time to balance what little I can before the final accounting comes. Because it will come. For me, for my children, for their children. The debt is never erased. It is only reduced. And El Guardián is patient. He has all the time in the world. May God have mercy on my soul.